Black woman married a disabled billionaire, but the wedding night changed everything. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new dramatic stories. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more emotional films every week. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain poured over the city of Atlanta, streaking silver trails across the windows of a quiet downtown cafe. Inside, the smell of espresso and polished wood filled the air. Naomi Harris sat alone by the corner table, her trembling fingers tracing the edge of a plain white envelope. Her reflection in the window showed exhaustion, but also defiance. Across from her sat Jonathan Reeves, a man whose presence carried the calm authority of power. He was in his mid-30s, sharply dressed, his wheelchair positioned neatly beside the table. Even seated, he radiated quiet control, the kind that made people lower their voices when he entered a room. Naomi swallowed hard. "You said this was about a job." Jonathan's gray eyes did not blink. "It is. Just not the kind you expect." "Good now." He slid the envelope toward her. Inside were legal papers, perfectly typed with her name printed on the top line. "Marry me," he said evenly. "Think of it as a contract." Naomi froze. The cafe noise faded to a low hum. She stared at him, unsure if he was joking. "Excuse me? I need a wife," he continued, his tone businesslike. "For public reasons. The media loves to question my personal life. My company's image depends on stability. This arrangement will help both of us." Her pulse quickened. "Both of us? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Jonathan replied. "You are responsible. You are discreet. You need financial security. And I can provide that. It as we go. It is not presents." Naomi leaned back, her heart pounding in disbelief. "So, this is not about love. This is about appearance." He met her gaze without flinching. "You could call it survival. You will receive compensation, housing, and freedom. In return, you will attend events as my wife and maintain discretion. The contract lasts 1 year." The words hung in the air like thunder. Naomi's first instinct was to stand up and leave. But then she thought of her mother in the hospital, the unpaid medical bills piling on her kitchen counter, the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. She took a shaky breath. "And if I refuse?" Jonathan's tone softened, though his expression stayed composed. "Then you will keep struggling. And I will keep being the man everyone pities but never respects." Her chest tightened. There was something raw beneath his calm, something lonely. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, lightning flashed, cutting across the window like a crack between two worlds. One of wealth and power, and one of exhaustion and survival. Naomi finally whispered, "You are serious, aren't you?" "I do not joke about business," he said quietly, "or about promises." She stared down at the signature line on the contract, her fingers trembling as they brushed the paper. This was madness. It was wrong, but it was also a lifeline. Jonathan watched her carefully, his voice steady but low. "You have 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer disappears." He turned his wheelchair slightly, leaving a faint trace of cologne and silence behind him as he moved toward the exit. Naomi remained frozen in her chair, the envelope lying open before her like a deal with destiny. Rain continued to fall outside, soft, relentless, and full of unanswered questions. And somewhere deep down, she already knew this decision would change everything. The next morning, the gray Atlanta sky hung heavy with rain, turning the streets into a mirror of silver light. Naomi barely slept. The envelope from Jonathan Reeves still sat on her kitchen table, its crisp edges catching the dull morning glow. She had read the contract 3 times through the night, every clause, every condition. 1 year. No intimacy unless mutually agreed. Attend 5 public events. Discretion required. Compensation guaranteed. Her stomach twisted. It was not love. It was survival dressed in legality. She looked around her small apartment, half-packed boxes, stacks of hospital bills, the silence that always followed the sound of worry. When the hospital called again that morning, the nurse's voice was kind but urgent. "Miss Harris, your mother's treatment cannot wait much longer." Leftly, Naomi pressed the phone against her ear, nodding even though no one could see her. "I understand." she whispered. I will find a way. When the call ended, she looked once more at the contract. The paper suddenly felt heavier than any burden she had carried before. By late afternoon, her decision was made. At precisely 5 o'clock, she stood in front of the towering glass building of Reeves Holdings. The lobby was bright and cold, all marble and silence. People in tailored suits moved past her without a glance. She felt invisible, like a shadow passing through a world that did not belong to her. At the reception desk, a woman looked up with a polite but distant smile. Do you have an appointment, ma'am? Yes, Naomi replied softly. Naomi Harris, Mr. Reeves is expecting me. The woman's fingers moved across the keyboard, then she nodded. Top floor, executive office. He will see you now. The elevator ride felt endless. Naomi stared at her reflection in the mirrored wall's plain dress, trembling hands, eyes tired but alive. When the doors opened, a quiet hallway stretched before her, lined with dark wood and soft lights. Jonathan's assistant waited near the end, calm and precise. Right this way, Miss Harris. Jonathan was at his desk, reviewing documents when she entered. The office overlooked the city, its skyline blurred by the falling rain. He glanced up, expression unreadable. You are early. Naomi held the contract tightly. I made my decision. His gaze shifted to the folder in her hand. And, I will do it, she said, her voice barely steady. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then he nodded once, as if he had already expected that answer. Good, he said quietly. Sit down. He opened the folder on his desk. Inside were two identical copies of the contract. You have read everything carefully? Yes. Then sign both. The pen in her hand felt heavier than metal. Her signature came out slow, deliberate, final. When she finished, Jonathan turned the papers toward himself and signed with confident strokes. The faint sound of the pen against the paper echoed in the room, like a vow neither of them understood yet. He closed the folder neatly. Welcome to our arrangement, Mrs. Reeves. Naomi blinked at the title. That feels strange to hear. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. It will feel normal soon enough. He reached into his drawer and took out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold band. This is for public appearances, he said, sliding it across the desk. You should wear it at all times. Naomi hesitated, then slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if measured in advance. For a moment she could not tell if that made her feel comforted or trapped. Jonathan glanced at his watch. The ceremony will be tonight. Private. Efficient. My attorney will handle the paperwork. You will receive transportation and attire. Naomi nodded slowly, her throat tightening. This feels unreal, she murmured. He looked at her then, his expression softer than before. Reality is often harder to believe than fiction. That evening, the car arrived exactly on time. Inside was a carefully folded ivory dress and a handwritten note. Wear this. Do not be late. Naomi's hands shook as she dressed, every breath a reminder of the promise she was about to make. The courthouse was nearly empty, quiet except for the sound of rain tapping on the high windows. Jonathan waited near the judge's bench, his wheelchair positioned beside a polished wooden table. He looked calm, his suit immaculate, his composure unbreakable. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. Do you, Jonathan Reeves, take this woman, Naomi Harris, to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Naomi Harris, take this man, Jonathan Reeves, to be your lawfully wedded husband? She hesitated, breath caught between fear and duty. I do. The judge signed the certificate and handed it to Jonathan's attorney. And just like that, it was done. No flowers, no music, no family. Only rain, ink, and silence. Jonathan turned toward her, extending his hand. Congratulations, Mrs. Reeves. From this moment on, our deal is official. Naomi took his hand. His palm was warm, steady, human. Understood, she said softly. Outside, the rain had not stopped. As they stepped into the waiting car, Naomi glanced down at the ring, gleaming faintly under the streetlight. She wondered if it was the beginning of safety or the start of something far more dangerous. The car glided through the city in silence, its headlights cutting through the rain. Naomi sat beside Jonathan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The scent of leather and faint cologne filled the air, yet the space between them felt colder than the night outside. Neither spoke. Every mile that passed only deepened the weight of what they had just done. When the car finally slowed, Naomi's breath caught. The Reeves estate rose ahead, vast and gleaming, framed by stone columns and iron gates that opened without a sound. The driveway curved through manicured gardens, lit by golden lamps. Each flicker reflected on the rain-soaked pavement. It looked less like a home and more like a museum, beautiful, perfect, and empty. Jonathan's voice broke the silence. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves." Naomi's heart thudded at the sound of the name. Home. The word felt misplaced. As the car stopped, a man in a black suit rushed forward with an umbrella, opening her door. Jonathan rolled down his window. "Elijah will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. "Yes, Mr. Reeves," the man said quietly. Inside, the house was all marble floors and quiet echoes. Every step Naomi took seemed to hum against the silence. Portraits lined the walls, faces of men and women who looked untouchable. Like history itself, a housekeeper appeared, her expression polite but distant. "This way, ma'am." Naomi followed her up a grand staircase, the railing cool under her fingertips. The housekeeper stopped at a door near the end of the hallway. "This will be your room. Mr. Reeves's suite is just across the hall. If you need anything, dial 0 from the phone by the bed. It is not of self, it is not whirl." "Thank you," Naomi whispered. The door closed softly behind her. The room was immaculate: cream curtains, soft carpet, a bed big enough for two but meant for one. A vase of white roses sat on the table, their petals perfectly still. Naomi sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. The gold ring gleamed on her finger, catching the warm light like a question she did not know how to answer. At exactly 7, there was a knock. Jonathan's voice came from the other side. "Dinner is ready." When Naomi entered the dining hall, she almost stopped breathing. The table stretched the length of the room, set for 2 but large enough for 20. A chandelier glittered overhead, scattering light across the polished silver. Jonathan sat at the far end, a quiet figure of composure. "You may sit anywhere you like," he said. She chose the seat closest to him, but still left a respectful distance. The servants poured wine, then disappeared, leaving them alone. Naomi's fork trembled slightly as she lifted it. "You do not have to be afraid of me," Jonathan said suddenly. Her eyes flicked up. "I am not afraid." He gave a faint, knowing smile. "You are. Most people are. My condition makes them uncomfortable." She shook her head quickly. "It is not that." "Then what is it?" he asked. Naomi hesitated. "You make everything sound like a transaction, even this dinner." His expression softened just a little. "That is because it is easier that way. Feelings complicate things. Business keeps life simple." She looked down at her plate. "Do you really believe that?" "I have lived long enough to know emotions are unreliable," he said quietly. "They make people promise things they cannot keep." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the soft hum of rain against the window filled the space. Naomi set her fork down. "Maybe reliability is not what people fall in love with." Jonathan's gaze met hers, sharp but searching. "Do you believe in love, Mrs. Reeves?" The question startled her. "I believe in people doing their best to care," she said. "Maybe that is close enough." Something in his eyes flickered pain, or maybe memory, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. He nodded once, then changed the subject. "You will be attending a charity gala with me this weekend. It will be your first appearance as my wife. The press will be there. They will watch everything you do." Naomi swallowed hard. "Understood." After dinner, Jonathan wheeled himself toward the library. Naomi followed for a moment, unsure if she should say goodnight. He paused at the door. "You handled yourself well tonight. I know this arrangement is not easy." She met his gaze, her voice soft. "Neither of us wanted it, but we both needed it." He gave a small nod. "That is true." When he disappeared into the library, Naomi returned to her room. She stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass in endless lines. Somewhere in this mansion of silence, she could still hear faint music playing from the other side of the hall. A piano, slow and deliberate. The melody was haunting, gentle but restrained, just like him. Naomi leaned her head against the window pane, the sound of the rain blending with the soft notes of the piano. Maybe this marriage was nothing more than a contract. Maybe it was destined to remain cold and practical. But in that quiet moment, with the storm outside and a melody she did not understand filling the air, Naomi felt something shift, something small, something human. And though she would not admit it yet, That was the first night she stopped thinking of him as only a deal. 2 days later, sunlight spilled weakly through the tall windows of the Reeves estate. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain and cedar. Naomi stood before a mirror in the guest room, adjusting the strap of the navy gown laid out for her by Jonathan's assistant. It was elegant, understated, and far more expensive than anything she had ever worn. Her first public appearance as Mrs. Reeves would be that evening, the Reeves Foundation Charity Gala. Her heart raced every time she thought about it. Dozens of reporters, investors, and family members would be there, all eager to judge the mysterious woman who had suddenly become the billionaire's wife. When she came downstairs, Jonathan was waiting near the entrance. He wore a black tuxedo, his wheelchair polished and sleek, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Naomi simply stared. There was strength in the way he held himself, as if the chair did not define him but rather obeyed him. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Naomi blinked, surprised. "Thank you. I did not expect you to notice." He gave a faint smile. "I notice everything, Mrs. Reeves, shall we?" The car ride to the gala was silent, but it was not the same kind of silence they had shared before. This one carried tension, nerves, anticipation. When they arrived, flashlights exploded from every direction. Cameras clicked, voices shouted questions. "Mr. Reeves, over here! Who is the lady? Is this your new wife? Is it true the marriage was arranged?" Naomi froze under the blinding lights. Jonathan's voice cut through the noise. "Stay close," he murmured. His hand brushed hers, lightly professional, but steadying. They entered the ballroom, where the hum of conversation and music swirled around them. Wealth shimmered in every corner, crystal chandeliers, gowns like waterfalls of silk, champagne glasses catching the light. Naomi felt the weight of every gaze turned toward her. Jonathan guided her to a table near the stage. "Remember," he whispered, "you are not pretending to belong here. You already do." Before she could answer, a woman in a glittering silver dress approached. Her tone was smooth but sharp. "Jonathan, darling, you did not tell us you were bringing company." Naomi recognized her instantly from the news, Clara Monroe, a high-profile investor and Jonathan's former fiancée. Clara's eyes flicked from Jonathan to Naomi, her smile polite and poisonous. "So this is the new Mrs. Reeves." Naomi smiled softly. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Clara tilted her head. "You must be very brave to marry a man like Jonathan. Not every woman could handle such a commitment." The meaning behind the words was clear. Naomi's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "It takes strength to face life when it is difficult. I think Jonathan understands that better than anyone." For a second, silence stretched between them. Then Jonathan's lips curved into something that almost looked like pride. "Indeed," he said. "That is why she is my wife." Clara's expression faltered. She excused herself with a stiff smile and turned away. As the evening went on, Naomi found herself moving with unexpected grace. She spoke with guests, smiled for photos, and answered polite questions with honesty but poise. The whispers began to change from suspicion to curiosity, then to quiet admiration. When the band began to play a slow tune, Jonathan leaned toward her. "Would you mind joining me for a dance?" Naomi blinked. "A dance?" He gestured toward the floor, where several couples swayed beneath the chandelier. "Do not worry," he said softly. "I can still lead." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. As they moved together, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, she realized the whispers had faded. No one was laughing. No one was pitying. They were watching something real, two people who looked, for that fleeting moment, like they belonged exactly where they were. And for the first time since the wedding, Naomi forgot about the contract. She forgot about the money, the headlines, and the fear. All she felt was the quiet strength in his touch and the steady rhythm of a heart learning how to trust again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the Reeves estate, painting the marble floors with soft gold. Naomi stood by the kitchen counter, her hair still loose from sleep, a cup of coffee warming her hands. For the first time since the wedding, the silence in the house did not feel cold. She replayed the moments from the gala in her mind, the dance, the look in Jonathan's eyes when he told Clara that she was his wife, not as a contract but as a truth he was proud to say aloud. Something about the way he had defended her had changed the air between them. The wall of formality had cracked, even if neither dared to admit it yet. When Jonathan entered the room, she straightened instinctively. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled neatly at his elbows. The morning light softened his sharp features, making him look less like a billionaire and more like a man trying to remember what ordinary felt like. "Good morning," he said, his tone calm but not distant. "Good morning," she replied. "I made coffee. Would you like some?" He nodded. "Please." Naomi poured the coffee carefully and handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed for half a second, brief, electric, real. "About last night," Jonathan began, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his cup. "You handled everything perfectly. The board members were impressed. The press coverage is already positive." Naomi smiled faintly. "So the mission was successful. Mating S. Gatter. And the Rokais. Gatter." He looked up then, something softer in his expression. "It was more than that. You were remarkable." The compliment caught her off guard. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." "Jonathan," he corrected gently. "You can call me Jonathan when we are alone." Her lips parted slightly, but she nodded. "Jonathan, then." The sound of his name from her voice hung between them longer than it should have. Later that day, while Jonathan worked in his study, Naomi wandered the mansion's long hallways. She paused at a doorway left slightly open and heard faint notes of piano drifting through. She stepped closer and saw him there, alone, playing with slow precision. The melody was delicate but full of emotion, nothing like the restrained man she had come to know. She waited until he finished before speaking. "I did not know you played." He looked up, surprised. "It helps me think." "It is beautiful," she said softly. "Sad but beautiful." He smiled, faint and tired. "I started playing after the accident. It was the only thing that made the pain feel like something I could control." Naomi hesitated. "What happened, Jonathan?" He took a slow breath. "2 years ago. Car crash. My brother was driving. He did not survive. I did, but not completely." Her heart sank. "I am sorry." "Do not be," he said. "It was not your fault. But people treated me differently after that. Investors, family, even Clara. They saw the chair, not me." Naomi stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then they never deserved to see you at all." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes, recognition, gratitude, maybe even longing. "You always say the right thing, Mrs. Reeves." "Naomi," she corrected softly. The silence that followed was heavier than words. That evening they dined together again. No servants, no pretense. The conversation flowed more easily. They laughed once, an unguarded, quiet sound that echoed through the vast dining hall. When Naomi stood to leave, Jonathan spoke again. "Naomi." She turned. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not treating me like a broken man." She met his eyes. "You are not broken, Jonathan. You just learned to live differently." As she walked back to her room, her heart beat faster than it should have. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this arrangement was beginning to change. What had started as a business deal was slowly becoming something fragile, dangerous, and undeniably real. A week later, the air inside the Reeves estate felt different, warmer, more alive. The house that once echoed with silence now carried the faint sounds of music, conversation, and something Jonathan could not quite name. Naomi's presence had softened the edges of his world. The days of polite distance were fading, replaced by moments that felt dangerously close to genuine connection. It was Friday evening when it happened, the night everything changed. Jonathan had spent the entire day in meetings, his patience wearing thin from the constant pressure of investors and board politics. By the time he returned home, exhaustion pressed against his shoulders. Yet as he wheeled through the foyer, he saw Naomi waiting near the staircase, dressed in a soft ivory gown. The faint glow from the chandelier caught in her hair, turning it to liquid gold. "You are home late," she said gently. "There was a board dispute," he replied. "It seems running a company is easier than managing egos." She smiled faintly. "You should eat." "I made dinner." He raised an eyebrow. "You cooked?" "I tried," she admitted. No promises on the taste. For the first time that day, Jonathan laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that startled them both. "Then, I will consider it an adventure." They ate together in the smaller dining room, the one she had quietly begun to prefer over the grand hall. The meal was simple: grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, a bottle of wine she had chosen because the label looked honest. Jonathan found himself talking more than he intended. He told her about the company's early years, about the sleepless nights and the moments he thought he would lose everything. She listened with the same steady calm she always carried, her eyes bright and sincere. When the plates were cleared, she poured him another glass of wine. "You never stop," she said softly. "Do you ever let yourself rest?" He hesitated. "Rest feels like giving up." "Or maybe," she said, leaning forward slightly, "it is the only way to start living again." Something in her tone disarmed him. Jonathan studied her face, the quiet confidence beneath her gentleness. "You sound like someone who has survived too." "I have," she said simply. "Not everything leaves visible scars." The room fell quiet. Outside, thunder rolled across the distance, faint but steady. Naomi looked toward the window. "Another storm," she murmured. "Seems the weather follows us." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Then let us not fight it." When the lights flickered a few minutes later, Naomi laughed nervously. "Perfect timing." The power blinked out completely, leaving only the soft orange glow of the fireplace. Jonathan's voice was low. "Looks like we have no choice but to enjoy the darkness." Naomi rose, moving toward the fire to add another log. The flickering light painted her face in amber tones. He watched her in silence, the way she moved, the steadiness in her hands. For months, people had looked at him with pity or fear, but she looked at him like a man, not a condition. When she turned, their eyes met, and neither looked away. He spoke first, his voice rougher than before. "Naomi, do you ever regret saying yes?" She took a slow breath. "Sometimes I am afraid of what this could become. But no, I do not regret it." He swallowed hard. "You were never supposed to mean this much to me." Her pulse quickened. "Jonathan," he shook his head, cutting her off gently. "I know this was supposed to be an arrangement. Safe, controlled. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a contract." The room felt smaller, the silence heavier. Naomi stepped closer, her voice trembling but clear. "Then maybe it never was just a contract. Maybe we were just too afraid to admit it." For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Jonathan reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers. "I cannot offer you a normal life, but I can promise you honesty. I can promise that when I look at you, I see the woman who brought me back to myself." Tears glimmered in Naomi's eyes, but she smiled through them. "That is all I ever wanted. Something real." The slain from Alligator and my daughter. When she placed her hand in his, it was not a grand gesture, not a cinematic declaration. It was simple, human, and filled with everything that words could not hold. The storm outside raged louder, wind pressing against the windows, thunder rolling like applause from the sky. Inside, the world was still. Jonathan whispered, "You have changed everything, Naomi." And in that moment, she realized he had too. The contract that once bound them in formality had become something else entirely, a promise neither of them had planned to keep, but one both of them desperately wanted to believe in. That night, the house that had always felt like stone finally breathed again. The next morning came with a calm, so fragile it felt like a secret. The storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in the air. Naomi woke early, her mind replaying the night before the flickering firelight, Jonathan's words, the warmth of his hand around hers. Something had changed between them, quietly but unmistakably. She made breakfast herself that morning, just as she had done in her old apartment. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, soft and inviting. When Jonathan entered, his hair slightly tousled, he looked less like the billionaire everyone feared, and more like the man she had glimpsed the night before, vulnerable, human. "Good morning," he said, his tone gentler than usual. "Good morning," Naomi replied with a smile. "I thought you might want a day off from the meetings." He arched an eyebrow. "Do I look that tired?" She chuckled. "You look human, that is all." He laughed quietly, and it made her heart tighten. For a moment, the world outside their walls did not matter. But peace never lasted long in their world of contracts and cameras. Just before noon, Jonathan's phone began to buzz relentlessly. His assistant's voice came through the speaker, tight and urgent. "Sir, we have a problem. The story has leaked." Jonathan's expression hardened. "What story?" "The marriage," the assistant said. "Someone sent the contract details to the press. They are calling it a fake union for publicity." Naomi froze, her stomach twisting. "What do you mean leaked? How?" Jonathan's face went pale, his jaw tightening. It does not matter how. What matters is that they will destroy you before they even question me. Within hours, headlines flooded the internet. Billionaire's contract bride exposed. Jonathan Reeves marries for image, not love. Naomi's phone lit up with messages from unknown numbers, insults, accusations, threats. She turned it off and placed it face down on the counter, her hands shaking. Jonathan rolled closer, his voice low but controlled. Naomi, listen to me. We can fix this. I will hold a press conference. I will say it is all false. Her throat tightened. But it is not false, Jonathan. It was a contract. You know it. I know it. The only thing that is not fake is how I feel now, and that does not matter to them. He looked at her, his eyes dark with guilt. I should have protected you better. Naomi shook her head, tears brimming. You could not protect me from what people choose to believe. You spent your whole life trying to manage perceptions, but you cannot control hearts. Not theirs, not mine. The silence that followed was heavy, full of things neither dared to say. Jonathan turned away, gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles went white. Give me time, he said finally. I will fix this. But Naomi's voice was small and steady. You cannot fix what was never meant to be hidden. That night, she packed a small suitcase. The mansion, once a refuge, now felt like a cage filled with echoes of what they had almost become. Before leaving, she slipped her wedding ring off her finger and placed it on the piano where he had once played for her. When Jonathan entered the room later, the first thing he saw was the ring, its gold band glinting softly in the lamplight. His hand trembled as he picked it up. The house was silent again, colder than before. The sound of the front door closing carried through the hall like a final chord. For the first time in years, Jonathan Reeves felt powerless, not because of his chair, not because of his reputation, but because the one person who had seen him beyond all that was gone. And this time, there was no contract left to bring her back. 3 days passed. The mansion felt emptier than ever, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The sound of Naomi's laughter, her footsteps in the hallway, even the quiet hum of her humming in the kitchen, it was all gone, leaving behind a silence that Jonathan could no longer bear. The scandal had exploded across every headline. Reporters camped outside the gates. Investors questioned his integrity. The board demanded he make a public statement to control the damage. But for the first time in his life, Jonathan did not care about his image. He cared only about the woman who had walked away when all she wanted was honesty. On the fourth morning, he rolled into his office and stared at the framed newspaper articles lining the wall. They used to represent victory. Now they felt like ghosts of a man who had forgotten what mattered. On his desk sat the ring Naomi had left behind, its simple band shining faintly in the morning light. He picked it up slowly, turning it in his palm. His decision was made. That afternoon, without warning his advisors or the press team, Jonathan called an emergency press conference. The media flooded the hall. Cameras flashed. His assistant whispered, "Sir, this could ruin everything." Jonathan's tone was steady. Then let it. When he appeared on stage, the noise in the room erupted. Questions fired from every direction. Mr. Reeves, did you marry Naomi Harris for publicity? Was it all a contract? Where's your wife now? He raised his hand, and the room fell quiet. His voice carried a calm that silenced even the cynics. Yes, he said clearly. It began as a contract. I will not deny it. I was a coward hiding behind a business deal because I was afraid of being seen as broken. Naomi Harris agreed to help me because she needed a lifeline. What neither of us expected was that the lie we built would turn into the only truth I have ever known. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Jonathan did not stop. She gave me back my dignity when I had none left. She reminded me that strength is not measured by wealth or power, but by compassion. And while the world is busy calling this marriage fake, I will say this once and for all. Naomi Harris is the most real thing that has ever happened to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold ring. Holding it up to the lights, he added, "This was supposed to be proof of a deal. Today, it is proof of something else. From this moment forward, I do not care what anyone thinks. I am ending the contract, but not the promise." The room erupted with noise questions, flashes, disbelief. But Jonathan had already turned away. He had said everything that mattered. Later that evening, Naomi stood in the lobby of the small community clinic where she had started working again. The television above the front desk played the recording of Jonathan's speech. The staff watched in silence. some glancing at her in awe. Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she listened to his words. When the reporter asked, "Do you still love her, Mr. Reeves?" His voice came through the speakers, steady and certain. "I never stopped." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The next morning, when Jonathan returned home, the house felt different. The air was lighter, the silence less heavy. As he rolled toward the piano room, his heart stopped. The ring was gone from the desk. Then he saw her. Naomi stood by the window, sunlight touching her face. "I saw your speech," she said softly. He swallowed hard. "And?" Naomi smiled faintly. "You finally told the truth." Jonathan's voice shook. "Does that mean you can forgive me?" She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. "It means I never stopped hoping you would find the courage to be real." He held her gaze for a long moment before whispering, "Stay." Naomi nodded, tears glimmering. "Only if you promise no more contracts." He smiled for the first time in days. "No more contracts, just us." And as she placed the ring back on her finger, the storm outside finally broke into sunlight. The house that once echoed with emptiness now carried the sound of something new: hope, quiet and undeniable. A week later, the world had quieted down. The headlines that once shouted their names were slowly replaced by new scandals, new stories. But inside the Reeves estate, time seemed to move differently, gentler, steadier, as if the house itself was learning how to breathe again. Naomi stood in the garden that morning, her hands brushing against the petals of white roses. The same flowers that once filled her room now bloomed freely under the sun. Behind her, she could hear the soft hum of Jonathan's wheelchair moving across the stone path. "You like the garden?" he said quietly. She turned and smiled. "It feels alive again. I think it missed being cared for." Jonathan stopped beside her, the sunlight glinting against the metal of his chair. "Much like me," he said, half teasing, half true. Naomi laughed softly. "You always find a way to turn everything into a lesson." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is because, for the first time in my life, I have something worth learning." They stood there in silence for a while, surrounded by the sound of wind in the trees and birds calling faintly in the distance. Jonathan reached into his jacket and took out a small envelope. "I have something for you," he said. Naomi frowned gently. "What is this?" He handed it to her. Inside was a folded document, but not a contract. She unfolded it slowly, her breath catching as she read the heading: Reeves Foundation, Community Medical Scholarship Program, Naomi Harris Initiative. She looked up, her voice trembling. "You named it after me?" He nodded. "You taught me that real power is not in wealth or control. It is in giving people the chance to stand again. This program will help women like you, those who need a start, not a savior." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Jonathan, this is real," he said softly. "Like us." For a moment, she could not speak. She simply knelt beside him, resting her hand over his. "You have come a long way from the man who lived behind contracts." He smiled. "Because you tore every one of them apart." As the wind moved through the garden, Naomi lifted his hand and placed it gently over her heart. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "That is what you gave back to me. I stopped being afraid of tomorrow." He swallowed hard. "And I stopped being afraid of myself." They stayed that way, their fingers entwined, the world around them soft and bright. In the distance, the old piano melody drifted through the open window, the same one he had played on the night everything began. Jonathan looked at her with a quiet conviction that carried no performance, no pretense. "The deal was fake, Naomi, but what I feel for you, it is the only real thing I have ever known." She smiled through her tears. "Then let us stop calling it a deal." He tilted his head. "What should we call it then?" "Love," she said simply. "Real, imperfect, and ours." Jonathan's lips curved into a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes for the first time in years. The sunlight glowed warmer, washing over the two of them like a silent blessing. As Naomi leaned closer, the faint scent of roses and rain filled the air, a reminder of every storm they had survived. And when she whispered, "I am home," Jonathan answered softly, "So am I." For once there were no contracts, no secrets, no audience. Just two people who had finally learned the difference between appearing strong and truly being whole. The camera of the world had turned away, but their story, the real one, was just beginning.